Det den bilen som et slags symbol på materiell velstand, mobilitet, aktivitet, komfort, individuell frihet. Mye bra. Men en gang når vi grenser for bilen også. Folk må gå eller ta buss og tog. Men når bilen blir sjelden og folk skal gå, hva muligheter for profitt det da? Å, kapitalister, hva finner dere da på? Da åpner de nye fotgjengerstasjon, hvor vi kan gå og få reparasjon, hvor vi kan skifte til sommersko og få fylt på en liter med superblod. De finner nok på noe, må dere tro. De kommer til å selge på ryggrinn og is, og smøresåper til høy pris. De setter opp dusjer vi kan vaske oss i, mens vi roterer og går i fri. En fotgjenger der penger i. Når vi lenge har gått i et bankende strekk, så åpner de oss opp og gir oss en sjekk. De skifter ut nyrer, hjerte og syn, og leverer en regning som koster oss gryn, før vi kan traske ned igjen til byen. Når vi blir gamle, og vi ikke kan gå, monterer de hjul vi kan trilte på. De lager en bane og fester oss i en spring, og trekker oss for en hundrings rundt i ring. De finner på så mange løgne ting. Når vi døde, og riktig begravt, da har vi tenkt etter hvor mye de har kavt for å tjene penger på alt det vi gjorde, før vi stakk av og til himmelen for. Og der det jo ingen kapitalister som bor. Nei, heldigvis og takk og pris. For det et fotgjengerparadis.
Tusen hjertelig takk til Stavangers egen Bertolt Brecht, den formidable Gunnar Roaldkvam, som for 1,5 uker siden vant Vestlandsmesterskapet i poesislam på denne scenen. Det alltid en stor glede, Gunnar. Og folkens, velkommen til KÅKÅnomics 2018. Velkommen til Norges og Nordens første, beste og morsomste økonomifestival. Og det vil si, velkommen til verdens andre økonomifestival gjennom tidene i verden, og ganske sikkert også allerede i år verdens største økonomifestival. For den første, den foregår i Kilkenny, heter KÅKÅnomics. Der det 25 000 innbyggere, en fantastisk by. Men det bare en tiendedel av det som bor her på Nord-Jæren, og jeg har sjekket programmet. Jeg helt sikker på at vi lager flere arrangementer enn Irene, i hvert fall i år. Per Inge Torkelsen mente i fjor at det var noe psykiatrisk som foregikk her på scenen. Han skjønte ikke at vi kunne trekke skamfulle hus, mens humorfestivalen sleit med besøket. Men det var egentlig bare som vi hadde trodd. Folk vet at det økonomi i alt. Folk vet at økonomi makt, og de har skjønt fra dag 1 at det vi ønsker å gjøre, det å trekke økonomi ut av konferansesalene til næringslivet, ut av bystyret og Stortinget og ut av akademia, ut til folk flest, ute i byen på et utested. Og i år blir det 12 av disse utestedene, så det mulig å oppleve KÅKÅnomics på i 4 dager. KÅKÅ moderskipet, og så har vi et skip til som vi har lagt til borte med Tollboden, som blir en stor og fin scene. Og så ligger scenene på rekke av rad opp gjennom Øvre Holmegate, gjennom Fagergata og bort til Oljemuseet i andre enden, der vi i år som i fjor viser filmprogrammet vårt, som gratis, og som i år nordisk, og handler om de temaene som vi har oppe underveis i festivalen. Vårt enkle grep jo å formidle med humor. Vi inviterer jo internasjonale og nasjonale eksperter og fagøkonomer til å komme her. De nødt til å komme så uformelle som de kan, snakke så forståelig som kan til folk flest. Samtidig så inviterer vi gjerne da et programlederlag av forskjellige typer som kan formidle og flinke til å formidle med et glimt i øynene. I år så byr vi på 70 arrangement. Vi har 160 deltakere over 4 dager altså, på 12 scener. Og det blitt et hekkans bra program, synes vi. Og jeg vil bare at dere skal sjekke avisa. Der det et program, og der ligger en flyer rundt på bordene. Det flyeren som mest oppdatert, og som dere bør bruke. Jeg vil minne om hovedkonferansen vår i morgen på dagtid. Det en spesielt bra hendelse. Begynner ca. klokka 9 i Stavangeren. Det handler om hvordan vi skal lage fremtidsbyen, den som vi trenger. Egentlig litt hvordan skal vi gå fra å være en sint bomringby til å bli en utviklet og bærekraftig by med en enklere hverdag for folk flest. Det et veldig bra program. Det veldig mange som burde takkes. De vet hvem de og de kommer helt sikkert alle til å være med på avslutningsfesten vår, som går på MS Sandnes på lørdag klokka 7. Ønsker dere alle velkommen der også. Men de som har vært med i redaksjonen bør nevnes. Det Klaus Moen, det Ola Kvaløy, og det Tom Hetland. Etterpå nå så skal det handle om hvordan du kan være et fritt menneske og yte motstand eller mot oppmerksomhetsøkonomien. Altså alt det digitale, altså slavebinder oss, og gjør at vi ikke går ut på sånne plasser som dette. Vi har fått i huset en av verdens ledende eksperter på dette, som tidligere har jobbet i Google, James Williams. Han skal holde et kort foredrag for dere, før han skal ha en samtale med en av Irlands mest legendariske komikere og forfattere, Colm O'Regan, med lang fartstid fra KÅKÅnomics. Men først så skal vi ha den offisielle åpningen. Og den gjør vi som vi gjorde i fjor, tenker jeg. Jeg hadde ikke stått her. KÅKÅ, Kverulantkatedralen, hadde ikke eksistert. Heller ikke KÅKÅnomics hadde det ikke vært for stifterne våre. Så de skal få lov å gjøre det på samme vis som i fjor. Det blir litt dollardorull og litt forskjellig, vil jeg tro. Folkens, ta godt imot Kristoffer og Signe Anne Stensrud.
Det går an. Vi kan det. Besøkstallet i fjor ble langt høyere enn det vi hadde trodd, og da hadde vi litt av denne her, går ikke det, kanskje det. I år så tør vi ikke sette tall på drømmen vår engang. Velkommen alle sammen til KÅKÅnomics 2018, og takk til hver enkelt for at dere kom. Takk til foredragsholdere, stab og frivillige. I fjor så ble det litt kort, og vi fikk aldri takket noen, så i år begynner vi med å takke. Vi vil også takke sponsorene. De også med for å få satt Stavanger på kartet. KÅKÅnomics en prosess. Så det noe dere mangler i år, så gi oss et lite hint, så skal vi se hva vi kan fikse det neste år. Kritiske tilbakemeldinger, de vil bli lagt merke til. Sure tilbakemeldinger uvelkomne. Konstruktive tilbakemeldinger kan det godt være vi bruker. KÅKÅnomics, folkelig, festlig, fantastisk. Sceneteppet dratt, og vi skal vise at vi kan. Og det går an. Da det dassrullen.
Colm, would you care to join me in this big moment?
Biggest moment of my life.
Yeah.
Don't use it all. We want it for next year as well.
Emergency, yeah.
Okay, you got it?
Yeah. So who's calling?
Hey! Okay, folkens, nå kjører vi. Please welcome Ireland's great son, Colm O'Regan. Welcome.
Thank you. First of all, can I say that I agree entirely with all that has been said so far. It is something that is dear to my heart, all that they have said, particularly the comments about rare breeds of cat and thunderstorms. So I do have a bit of Hey, Stavanger, jeg glad for Is that right? Did I say what Google Translate said I was saying? So not that I've insulted your country and your president. It's an honor to be here. It's great to be here in Stavanger. I like it first and foremost because all the vowels in Stavanger roughly do a job that I expect, and there are no extra hidden rules in the vowels in the word Stavanger. There are no little emoji or anything I need to learn over it, so that is good. Also, I've only just come to your city, so I haven't seen much, but what I've seen has impressed me greatly. I've seen the Best Western Hotel, the Bighorn restaurant, the Belgian consulate, and I went to the Ollie Museum. I was only there for a very short time before it closed, so I'm only up as far as the Jurassic period. I don't know how it ends, right? I don't know do you get oil? I'm not sure. So don't spoil it for me. I'm not sure how it works out for you guys. But I'm going to finish my visit during the week, so then I'll know how it all worked out. It is always interesting for somebody from Ireland, or indeed either UK or Ireland, to come to Scandinavia in general, because Scandinavia is always held. Whenever something goes wrong in Ireland, we are told then what they are doing in Scandinavia, the right way to do it. So if there's a headline about maybe the rate of teenage pregnancy is rising in Ireland, there will be a counterpoint to that saying, in Scandinavia there are only 4 teenage pregnancies, and every one of those children goes on to win the Nobel Prize, right? You know, if there's a complaint about the imbalance in maternity or paternity leave in Ireland, they'll mention that in Scandinavia you get 4 years paternity leave and you don't even need to have had a child. Like, I already have received half a day's paternity leave just for visiting. So it is very much a utopia I know it's a utopia as it is presented to us. If Scandinavia was your neighbor, your mother would be saying, I see that Scandinavia is training to be a doctor. You know, it's the constant pressure so that's why we have a bittersweet relationship with you, because you are our better older brother who is doing well. And but the thing is, of course, there is no such thing as utopia, and when you walk around any Scandinavian city, everything seems to work so well, everything is so clean, everything seems to be the natural culmination of design and thought, and this is how man and woman should coexist in the urban environment. You get that weird feeling like you do in a horror movie that all is not as it seems. So whenever I walk around a Scandinavian city, I'm waiting for somebody to come up to me and say, you like it here, don't you, Colm? And I say, I do, yes, it seems like a utopia. And then they say, but have you noticed everybody here is missing a finger? And I'm like, oh my God, then I noticed that straight away. And then everything starts to fall into place, and you know, all people who litter have put in a gulag. You know, I don't know, something is going on underneath the covers. Anyway, I'm hoping I won't discover whatever the dark secret is about Stavanger. But it's an honor to be at KÅKÅnomics. So I come from Kilkenomics, and I'm delighted to be at KÅKÅnomics. It's easy to remember. I also know that it's important, that pronunciation. It's not KÄKономicS. That's important, because KÄKономicS is the economics of things that are rotten. It's Greek, so that little, what do you call the little circle? What's the name for it? Is it an umlaut or a what? The O, is it? Double A. Okay. But the little circle, does it have a name? Oh, okay, all right. I'll take your word for it. I guess you know more about it than I do. I was perhaps being over-questioning on something about a language I know nothing about. Anyway, so it is great to be here, and an honor to present the first show, and a show that I think is very apposite for me. So this is, it's called Stand Out of Our Light, Freedom and Resistance in the Attention Economy. James Williams is its author. I've read this in digital form, read it in PDF, and still enjoyed it, right? So and it's a beautiful book. It's also a short book designed for people whose attention span has probably wavered. But it also, I think, it contains all you need to know. It doesn't labor the point, but it is very concise. I find it very apposite to my life right now, and as we all struggle to maintain our attention, this is a really good book as a handbook for the next decade of your life, I find. Its author is James Williams. He's a Texan, but one of the good ones. It was formerly a Google strategist. He is now working in Oxford, completing a PhD. His general area is in the area of digital ethics, and he's going to speak to you for a while, and then we'll have a chat afterwards. So I'll give a warm welcome to James Williams, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I did notice that the currency on the toilet paper was American currency, so I hope there's no symbolism in that. But actually, one of the things that when I come to Norway, I love is how beautiful your currency is, and how these things that we all look at every day, you've really taken the time and attention to make into an art form. And I think there's a lot of symbolism in that. But anyway, it's great to be back in Norway, and thank you again for having me. I wanted to begin by, in a universe far away from here, long, long time ago, to butcher the Star Wars quote, in ancient Greece, where there was a philosopher, one of my favorite philosophers who's ever lived, by the name of Diogenes of Sinope, lived. And he was not an ordinary philosopher. He had taken a vow of poverty, being exiled from his hometown for actually defacing currency. I don't know if this counts as defacing currency. I'll give it a pass. But he had no family of his own, no tribe of his own. He lived in the marketplace in Corinth in a big ceramic barrel, probably about as big around as this table. He wore only a loincloth. His best friends were the dogs that he hung out with. He would give philosophy lectures to them every day. He was kind of the closest thing philosophy has produced to a troll. So if Plato said we need philosopher kings, he was the philosopher troll. He would show up to Plato's lectures and eat loudly to interrupt them. He would pleasure himself in front of all of them, the shoppers in the marketplace. He would carry a lantern around during the day, and when people asked what he was doing, he would say, "I'm looking for an honest man." So real troll figure. And so most people found him outrageous, impulsive, rude, but he was enormously admired by Alexander the Great, who was arguably the most powerful person in the world and arguably the most famous person of all time. And so one day, Alexander finally visits Diogenes, this philosopher troll he admires, while Diogenes was sunning at a gymnasium in Corinth. Alexander approaches with his soldiers, his whole retinue of servants and guards, and it must have been a crazy scene, right? This entire army basically coming before this, homeless guy in a loincloth lying on the ground. And Alexander is fawning over him. He says, "Diogenes, I respect you so much. I admire you so much. Ask of me anything, and it will be done. Any one wish, and I'll grant it." And so Diogenes was lying in the sun at the time, and so he looks up at Alexander, and the air must have been just thick with anticipation. Like, what would he ask? And Diogenes says, "Stand out of my light." And I think there's something I love about that story, not just the kind of trollish, pugnacious attitude that it embodies, but I think there's a lesson there for a way in which it's healthy to be responsive to the great powers of one's own time. And in our time, those great powers, for sure, are the designers, the companies, these entities that create these devices and services that we use every day, which now are kind of like GPSs for our lives. They direct us in one way or another. They're sort of this attentional lens through which we see the world. And I think, so I was working at Google several years ago, and the narrative that I had always had when it came to technology was that more technology is better, more information is better, that the whole point of technology is to improve our lives, and that's what it was doing. But one day I had this realization that there was more technology in my life than ever, more information in my world than ever, but somehow it was feeling harder than ever to do the things that I wanted to do. And I felt that something was happening with attention, and that wasn't being taken into account in technology design. As Aldous Huxley had said in Brave New World Revisited, the defenders of freedom in his time had failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. And I felt like something was happening in a similar way in our time, that these great powers, the Alexanders of our time, were standing in the light of our attention. And I didn't know how to talk about it or even how to frame the problem at the time, but I knew that what was happening was deeper than just distraction, just deeper than addiction, deeper than mere manipulation. And so what I think has happened is, this is a festival broadly framed around economics. I think it's instructive to root this question in the observations of Herbert Simon, who in the 1970s pointed out that when information becomes abundant, attention becomes the scarce resource. So there's a kind of figure ground inversion that happens. So for instance, 200 years ago, you could go out on a town square and start preaching something, and people would probably stop and listen to you because information was scarce. They had the surplus time and attention to give. But if you tried to go to, say, Times Square today and start preaching about how TV or the internet or whatever is bad, people would just walk by you because that's sort of the epitome of information overload. But I think that this inversion between information and attention hasn't been taken into account really in most of the systems that kind of guide our world, whether that's politics or news or advertising or whatever. And I think that this flip has happened so recently that we don't have even a good way to talk about what's happening. A lot of the ethical issues we talk about when it comes to technology still focus on the management of information, things like privacy and data protection, surveillance. But they don't usually talk about the way in which technology manages our attention. So ways in which we're persuaded, manipulated, nudged in one direction or another. And so just the mere fact of all of this information coming at us through this one little device, which is the general purpose computer that we carry around in our pockets, a fire hose of everything in the world, all the most interesting things in the world, 2 seconds away. And it's getting less and less, right? You can unlock your phone now with a fingerprint, and it reduces the latency to sort of actually acting on those impulses. I think it privileges our impulses over our intentions. It makes it where it's easier to, so to speak, eat the potato chips informationally rather than the nutritious, balanced, meal. And I think that what this has created is a kind of crisis of self-regulation, where if before, a medium was bounded by space and time somehow, you had to sit down at the TV and watch TV or sit down at the computer and type away. But now it's with us all the time. Technology has kind of enveloped our lives. I think that it puts a new responsibility on us to put these boundaries in place. So if the information technology, the whole point of it in an information scarce world was to break down these boundaries between us and information. But now, with these things in our pockets, they've been broken down almost completely. Then it sort of changes the task of technology to putting boundaries in place, to saying what is the information that we want to actually engage with. So it's less about information access and more about information selection and filtering. So that would be hard enough as a problem, having a fire hose of information coming at you all the time from, on this device that's the first thing you touch when you wake up a lot of the time, the last thing you touch when you go to sleep. But on top of that, there is this entire industry, a persuasion industry, which emerged out of the advertising industry that is trying to boost this crisis of self-regulation in our lives even more, to make these things even more interesting, to put things even more front and center in front of us, to make it give us things that we're even more likely to click on, maybe not things that we want to click on or that we find fulfilling. And so this persuasion industry broadly can be described as an attention economy. And I didn't come up with this term. I don't know exactly who did coin it, but it's been around for a while. And all life is kind of an attention economy in some way, right? We enjoy getting attention from others. It's valuable. There's a healthy aspect to this. But when you sort of look at when this happens on a global scale, and it's like I'm comparing myself to, say, an influencer who gets millions and millions of likes on something. It becomes a kind of parody of the healthy attention economy of life. And I think what's happened is that the technology has essentially kind of hacked these dynamics of the attention economy, put measurement mechanisms in place such that now what most of these services we use day to day, whether it's social media or whatever, what they're trying to do is essentially compete for our attention and get us to spend as much attention as we can with them, click, tap, scroll, whatever, spend as much time with them. And this is the dominant business model of services on the internet. And this is a kind of scary thing to me because it's a kind of, I think, perversion of what advertising always was. Advertising was always about giving us more information that helps us make a better purchase decision. But now it's about just grabbing and holding our attention, and whoever does that best will win. And it's a relentless global competition to do this. So I guess all this is to say, if we think about the goals we have for ourselves, right? For attending this conference, our goals for this week, for this year, they're things like, I want to spend more time with my family, I want to learn about this topic, I want to take that trip I've been planning to take. These are the real human goals that we have in life. But these systems that we use day to day, the goals they have for us, what they hold up as success for us, is not those things. It's how much time can we spend with it, how many times can we click on things, how many reshares, retweets, et cetera, do we do? And I have never met anybody who actually has those goals for themselves. I don't know if anyone here does. I would highly doubt it. I would love to meet someone who does have those goals for themselves, just so I could do some research on their mind and understand their priorities. Probably several papers in there. But so basically what that means is that this entire global information and communications network, the services that have been built on top of it, are fundamentally not on our side. Their goals are not our goals. And this to me seems like an enormous problem. And so I think that what this means then is that there are implications for our lives that go beyond just distraction, which is how I think it's mostly been talked about. I pull out my phone to do one thing, and an hour later I found I've watched like 10 cat videos, but not actually done the thing that I wanted to do. But that happens over time as well, right? Like over weeks, months, years, distracted days add up to distracted years, add up to distracted life. And we would never put up with this if it was a device that was navigating us through physical space. If a GPS did this, if you put in a destination and then it took you to another town or another country, you wouldn't keep using it, right? You would throw it out the window of your car and stomp on it and sue the person who made it. But we put up with this every day when it comes to the technologies that are guiding us through informational space. And I don't think we should. Because I think the implications are enormous, right? So, like I said, what we're talking about is more than just distraction or addiction. Part of, I think, the challenge here, thinking about an attention economy is that we've never had to really specify, what is attention? How do we conceptualize it? How do we measure it? We're at the very early stages of this, and this because there hasn't been much in our world that really, truly challenged our attention. But I take a lot of guidance from the philosopher psychologist William James, not just because his name is the inverse of mine, but he described attention as the essential phenomenon of will. And I think that what's ultimately at stake in this question of the capture, exploitation, management of our attention is the question of the freedom of the human will at individual levels as well as collective levels. And I think a more useful question when we think about attention is not what is attention, but what do we pay when we pay attention? And when we ask this question, I think that it becomes a lot clearer, right? What we pay when we pay attention is what we could have been, the things we could have done but didn't do, the selves, the people we could have been but weren't, the things we could have learned but didn't, the opportunity costs. So we pay attention with all of the great things that might have been. And so I think when we think of it this way, then when we say, okay, we're paying with our attention to get free products and services on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, what we're paying with is far more precious than anything we're getting, like by orders and orders of magnitude, I think. And so when we think of this question of the human will, Harry Frankfurt kind of at Princeton, I think, is great on this. He talks about it in terms of kind of doing, being, and wanting. So there's kind of the success of my will in the sense of what do I want to do today? Like I want to go buy this thing at this store. I want to go hang out with my brother, this kind of thing. So the task domain. This is how we've generally thought about attention. But I think over time there are questions of being, right? So how are we living in alignment with the values that we have for ourselves? Are we accomplishing those longer term goals we want to accomplish? But then on a deeper level, I think there's a question of not just, as he says, doing what we want to do or being who we want to be, but wanting what we want to want. So not just pursuing the goals and values we have, but knowing how to even come up with them in the first place. And so this gets in questions of reflection, of leisure time, of metacognition, and this kind of thing. And so I think one thing I was trying to do in this book, and I don't have time today to really kind of go through the entire narrative of it, is see if we could stretch out this language of attention to cover these wider domains of the human will. And there are many ways of describing all this stuff, but I think that this has been really helpful to me as a way to talk about it. But all this is to say, if what the attention economy is involved in is a competition for the management of exploitation of our attention, and what that means at the end of the day is competition to nudge, to persuade, to manipulate the human will, I think there are enormous implications for the possibility of democracy in the world. Because as Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, the will of the people is the basis of the authority of democracy. And so, as a result, anything that would be undermining that will is undermining the possibility of a kind of democracy worth having. And so this is why I think that this question of the attention economy is a first-order political problem. And there's this phrase that people have picked up on where I say, like, I think it could be the defining moral and political question of our time, like how we actually get around this. Because if in the same way that if you're driving a car and your windshield is muddied up and you can't see where you're going, it's a first-order problem to clean off your windshield before you figure out anything else about where you're going. And that's why I think this is a first-order problem. The lens of our attentional world, which is shaped by our media, if it's so distorted by the competition for our attention, if the incentives that journalists have, that media outlets have to put things that outrage us in front of us, put things that they give us a skewed view of the world, that polarize us, that make us fearful, that speak more to our tribalistic identity, the side of us, as opposed to the sort of the questions of what we have in common, our common values, our common stories, our common identities. To me, I think this is like a cleaning the windshield of our media ecosystem problem that has to precede doing anything that matters, whether it's combating climate change or extremism or anything else. I just don't see how we can give attention to those things that matter, how we can fix those things that matter if we don't give attention to those things that matter. So this is why I think it's kind of the defining moral, political challenge of our time, as well as the fact that, it's our first truly global communications network, and this is the dominant incentive for design, the dominant business model. So this brings us, how much time do I have, by the way? Well, I think you could do another 5-10 minutes. 5-10 minutes. Okay, cool. Would be sensitive of your attention as well. So this brings us to the question of what we can do. And I think that the picture here is a bit messier than defining the problem. I think we can kind of define some compass headings here, but not map destinations, so to speak. I mean, I think one thing we can do is, as we're doing here today, and again, thank you for the opportunity, and as I've been trying to do lately with this book, as in Ibsen's great play, An Enemy of the People, Dr. Stockman, who's the doctor in the city, and he finds that the water is poisoned, but nobody wants to admit it for economic reasons. He keeps just repeating, the water is poisoned, the water is poisoned, the water is poisoned. I think this is one of the first things we can keep doing, is just repeating, the water is poisoned, our attention is poisoned. These systems that we're using that say they're on our side, that have marketing messages, mission statements, slogans about these great things they want to do with our lives, the water is poisoned. The actual goals, the actual designs are not on our side. They're not aligned with our interests. The water is poisoned. And I think this gets at another thing we can all do in the face of this enormous and I think historically unprecedented challenge, which is really evolve our language and find the right way of talking about the problem, because we can't fix the problem until we can talk about it clearly. So I think one thing I've been working on a lot lately is essentially trying to come up with what I've been calling a grammar of influence. So we have a lot of words for talking about how we influence each other, persuade, coerce, manipulate, but they don't seem to me sufficient at all. Just to take one example, the term election meddling, which has been used a lot lately. Now, if you're going to come up with a word to describe the undermining of the political will of a people, it seems like we could do a lot better than the word meddling, right? Like meddling is when your grandmother calls and inquires about your love life. She's kind of meddling in your love life. It seems just a terribly impotent word to talk about what we're actually describing. So I think what we need to do is really kind of come up with a more coherent way of talking about, like what kinds of nudges, what kinds of persuasion, what kinds of influence do we really mean? Because, in the last US election, for instance, there were more fact checkers than ever, but it didn't do a damn bit of good, because what they ought to have had were like persuasion checkers, people who were talking about and raising to our consciousness ways in which the rhetoric, the persuasive techniques of candidates were being used to sort of kind of punch non-rational buttons in our brains. That's what we really needed, not fact checkers, because it's not kind of the message, it's the medium that really matters. So that's one thing. I think another is a better way of talking about power relations within technology. So it seems to me that if we were to kind of describe the technological landscape that we have in front of us as a kind of government, it would be a kind of attentional serfdom, so to speak. And I think it's instructive that the gover in government and the cyber and cybernetics stem from the same Greek root, which is kiber, to steer or to guide. So literally, these devices, these media ecosystems are a kind of attentional government. So I think it's an interesting question then, if we were to reframe it that way, how do we move from a kind of attentional serfdom to an attentional democracy or some more accountable system? It seems like that would be a useful way to talk about it. And there's not a lot of people really forcefully advancing these kinds of conversations, I think. Of course, a lot of the effects come from design that is incentivized by certain business models, like advertising. I think that like a reevaluation of advertising is really in order. I don't think anybody knows what advertising is anymore. I think that in the 20th century, it kind of transmogrified using these various non-rational methods, getting more into the area of kind of not demand fulfillment, but demand generation, things like branding, et cetera. It moved from sort of just giving us information to shaping our behavior, shaping our thinking. And so I think the core question I think societies need to answer when it comes to the business model question is, what kinds of psychological manipulation should we consider to be acceptable as business models, especially knowing that whatever we accept will also be used for political persuasion as well. This is, I think, for instance, Facebook's the kind of cognitive dissonance they have to live with now is saying our advertising systems are so effective at persuading people, but of course, no, we don't persuade people in political ways. So I think that, again, it gets at this question of really getting better at talking about and defining the kind of persuasion we want to have. A few last things. Again, there's probably like 20 to 30 things that I could talk about here, but I think a prioritization of the arts and humanities is really in order. I think one of the big risks is not that we will somehow like lose democracy and move into an explicitly authoritarian system. It's that the concept of democracy will be so diluted and we'll forget why we care about it, that we'll sort of have the shell of it, but the substance of something else. And so I think that teaching philosophy, ethics, values, having values-oriented conversations at as young an age as we can is absolutely critical, as is teaching critical thinking and this kind of thing. So I think that's another one. I think another one is about bringing accountability into design. So this gets at how can we have standards bodies that in the same way we have consumer reports for safety of cars, or like codes of safety for buildings, could we have kind of codes of kind of life worthiness for digital technologies? I think some kind of standards bodies, evaluation bodies like that would be really valuable. At the end of the day, I think something kind of on the model of Wikipedia, but more sort of explicitly political than that, where if the principle that we want to follow is things that have great power over us ought to also have great accountability to us, I think some kind of more democratic approach to design is in order. It just doesn't feel right to me that a decision I make today that has some kind of substantive importance in my life is a result of a decision made in a conference room in Mountain View, California, by somebody who no one else knows they're making that outside the people in that room, and there's no appeal to it. There's something that just seems kind of fundamentally wrong to me about that, having been in those rooms. There's a lot of things we can do around measuring the intentions people have. One thing that happens right now is that services online will try to persuade us toward one thing, persuade us to click on something, and then we click on it, and then they say, well, see, they must have wanted to click on it. And so they take evidence of effective persuasion as evidence of our intention. So there's an inference that that's our intention. So there's a kind of like false feedback loop there. So I think that there's a lot we can do around requiring services to actually measure our intent, measure our goals, ask us what we care about, because then that gives us the leverage to actually hold them to those kind of standards. And then I think at the end of the day, leaning into these experiences that we all have of awe and wonder, which it's been shown in some research go viral just as well as things that are outrageous in the attention economy. So for me, that's space travel, space exploration. And I think it's interesting that in the 1960s, which was a similar period of societal turbulence, space exploration gave us a kind of common human story to rally around. And so that's where I find inspiration. I was born in Cape Canaveral, Florida, so I may be biased in that way. But for everybody, it could be something different. But I think, there's this school of thought, narrative identity theory, where it's about we get our identities from the stories that we tell. And there's stories at the level of our family, at the level of our country. But I think that broader human story, the meta-narrative, as it's been called, especially in a secular world, I think there's a big opportunity to really, to more explicitly kind of pursue this. And, it's been the domain of art and literature for the last 30, 40 years, like Star Wars and things like this, The Matrix, et cetera, kind of the hero's journey sort of thing. But I think there's really an opportunity to find better stories, to incentivize the creation of better stories, and to lean into these experiences of awe and wonder. And I think, to take it as a cultural value, this is what I love about Norway too, take it as a cultural value to be attentive. I probably will butcher the word, but Hurtigruten, the slow TV, the putting the camera on the boat for, 130 something hours. Like, to me, this is the kind of thing that is needed, like, in the world, where we say, like, deep thinking, considered attention to something, which then is aligned with a celebration of our cultural values or natural beauty or whatever. That ought to be the things that media is bringing to people, the things that fulfill them, that matter, not the things that will just get them to click on it, that then polarize them, separate them from other people. There's enough of that in the world. We don't need to add more of it. So I'll just end on, I guess it's an appropriate quote to end on, given that we're heading into the winter here in the north of the world. But in the last year or two, in one way, it's been heartening how some of the political earthquakes around the world, the Trump election, kind of this wave of populism, et cetera, they've kind of brought these questions of technological persuasion into the foreground. But I've had this one line from a Theodore Rothke poem rolling around in my head, and the line is, in a dark time, the eye begins to see. And I think there's something to that about how, there's a silver lining here, where, if you go to the New York Times today, their ads trying to get you to subscribe use truth as the way, the value to get you to subscribe, or the slogan on the Washington Post says, democracy dies in darkness. There's a way in which questions of value, of purpose, have kind of been forced to come into the foreground. And I think that it gets at this idea, in a dark time the eye begins to see. Sometimes we don't remember, we're not forced to remember what we value and why until it's actually threatened. I think that's the case with our attention individually in the face of this overwhelming global attention economy. I think it's the case with our common values, whether that's truth or freedom or democracy collectively. And we'll see what happens, but I'm optimistic that the kinds of conversations are happening are the right ones. And if we can continue the momentum on all this, I'm hopeful that we can kind of move out of the dark time and carry through into something even greater than we might have been able to imagine previously. So on that, I thank you again for your attention and for having me here today, and looking forward to the conversation. So thanks.
James, I'm going to take a seat there.
Sure.
So for this section, before we start, I just wanted to check who here in the audience has a smartphone, just by hands raised. And of those people with their hands raised, how many people feel addicted to it, or they use it too much? A few. And how many people feel manipulated by it in the way that James is talking about it? So there's still a few. Is there anybody who doesn't have a smartphone? No. Okay, Grant. We're all screwed. Okay. I found it.
They're not here because they couldn't look up the details.
Exactly. Yeah. First of all, I thought it was great that the format of the show allowed you to speak for without like an artificial debate at the start, to actually get your point across and to grab that people's attention. From my point of view, I recently downloaded the screen time update on my iPhone in an effort to reduce the amount of time I spent on the phone, because I can feel the kind of, I know you say it's not strictly speaking about just addiction, but it is a huge part of it for me. And I found that I was spending too much time on my phone, but now that I have a measure of this week versus last week, how long I spent on the phone, I'm appealing to a more older impulse, which is the desire to do better this week than I did last week. So the net effect is that the new technological update has arrived that is making you spend less time on the phone, less susceptible to the things you're talking about. And even when in your book, you refer to often the bad feelings one gets spending too much time on social media, watching arguments rage between two people that you don't know, and yet suddenly now you're taking on all of their emotional load as well on an issue you didn't know you had to worry about until you saw about, Now, it's an Apple update, so there's probably a price to pay for gaining that new screen time. Maybe my battery is already dead, or they own my house, I'm not sure. But has technology a role to play to fix what technology is creating?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in the same way that the brake on a car is a technology that moderates other technological components of a car, I think that these new systems, which are kind of broadly being discussed in terms of digital well-being by Apple, Google, Facebook, others, to help give us information about how long we're spending doing things, what apps are we using. I think these are positive. I think they're a first step on a longer journey. I think they're kind of a bandage on a problem, on one particular problem, but not the deeper systemic surgery that's needed. I think part of the for all their benefits, I think that part of the challenge with them is people who, there's a selection bias at place. Certain people will seek them out knowing that they spend more time than they want to with their technologies, but other people might not, either because they don't know they're spending too much time, or I think one thing that happens is when we see that we're spending too much time with our phone, we feel guilty and then don't want to kind of acknowledge it. I think we moralize that kind of loss of control, loss of agency in a certain way. But for those people who do use it, certainly there can be a benefit. But I don't think we should let it slip into a narrative about, it's just up to the user to sort of to self-regulate in the face of this entire kind of persuasive ecosystem. But to the extent that they are valuable to people and a step toward what needs to happen, I think they're a good addition. Yeah.
Do you think the way we are I think you use the term in your book, serfs, and you haven't used slave, but it's probably an emotive term and is often overused, that is it analogous to way gambling companies exploit or alcohol companies exploit? Is it like, what's their end game? Because ultimately they can't, it doesn't make economic sense to destroy us, you know. So what do they want to do? Like the engineer that you talk about in the room, you were privy to those meetings. Is it engineering for the sake of it and the joy of making a new thing, just like a nuclear scientist kept on splitting atoms until something amazing happened and eventually 20 years later said, oh my God, what have I done? Is this what's happening? Is it engineering joy leading to bad things?
Yeah, I think there are multiple levels to it. I mean, I don't think it's, like 99.9% of the time, it's not the case that the designer or the engineer wants to produce some bad effects in people's lives. I haven't met any engineer or designer who goes into their field to make the world worse. But I think what happens is, as W. Edwards Deming said, a bad system will beat a good person every time. I think at the level of the business model, if your business model is about capturing as much of people's attention as you can, that inevitably sets up adversarial incentives between the design and the person. And then I think at a company level, at a kind of broader economic level, there's this kind of desire, especially among public companies, for continued growth. And so, I mean, part of the problem is there is no end game. It's a perpetual growth kind of aim, where as long as you can ride that balance between continued growth and not doing so much to outrage people, to bring these mechanisms of persuasion to their awareness that they sort of say, wait a minute, what's happening, and start to fight back, that's kind of the problem, is there is no actual kind of aim to it.
Can you remember your personal epiphany where you were in Google working were you in AdWords? Were you in that area, or designing advertising?
Search advertising, yeah. The systems and the tools.
Was there a moment where you said, I can't do this anymore? Like, is it that kind of moment, or had you been evolving a feeling, just a personal feeling of technology is not making my life better?
I mean, there was a moment where I just sort of walked out of the building and never came back, kind of. But I think there was a moment personally when I realized, like I said, there's more devices, more information around, but it was harder to do what I wanted to do. But then I think there was also a moment when I looked at these dashboards, that are used across the industry, like web analytics dashboards, and saw that these engagement metrics, as they're called, number of clicks, number of views, these kind of things, just realizing that nobody has those goals for themselves, but that's what the system is optimizing for. So I think that it was kind of the personal and the sort of industry level epiphany.
Just that word engagement, in Norwegian, do you use it the same way? Measuring people's engagement with a website, and what is it? Is it a direct translation? So, is there something about the words that are being used as well to talk about this new industry? Because this is a country which got a new industry in the late 50s, and lots of new words became, on everybody's tongue within a short period of time. Can you talk about the way words are used to describe processes within this huge machine that perhaps hide the impact of what's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, with engagement in particular, it's worth pointing out that another use of engagement is one army engaging another army, so it's like an inherently adversarial thing. I think one of the things when I started working in the kind of this advertising industry was just how there was a weirdness to the words. So, for instance, when the advertiser trying to get you to purchase something or download something, take some action, they call it a conversion, which is a weirdly kind of religious, metaphor. I think similarly, there's a kind of dehumanizing language that's used in, metonymy and kind of things like talking about users as eyeballs, or putting like the purchase funnel. Like, I don't know any
even
situation.
I suppose the word user
User
is another vaguely dehumanizing. User interface, that was the human bit of building a website, but we don't say humans anymore, really, do we?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the user term, it came out of an earlier phase of of technology design where, like out of ergonomics and human factors in like kind of the 70s, 80s, where it was about how do you optimize for success in a task domain. So if you're a fighter pilot, how do you optimize for them being able to, turn the dial when they need to, or if you're creating Microsoft Word, optimizing for them to be able to write the doc. So it's like they are using the thing. But now I think what's happened is that, the technology is having now kind of enveloped our lives. And up-leveling is kind of, I think, happening in user experience research. And I mean, the department I graduated from at University of Washington is called Human-Centered Design and Engineering. But I think that perspective, the up-leveling from the user pursuing a successful task to a human pursuing success in their life hasn't fully happened. And I think that's kind of what this conversation around digital well-being lately is getting at. It's the kind of up-leveling of user experience design and research.
One of the things you touched on in your book, and you just mentioned there when you talked about conversion, is there is some parallels with religion. So, organized religion has created the collapse in many countries has created a vacuum of beliefs, and there are a small number of people with a huge amount of power over billions of people's lives. I presume it could be less than 50 people make decisions now that affect a couple of billion people, and they may not have set out to do that, but now you have these young, mostly men, possibly 12, leading a large number of people inadvertently. Apart from, it's like a religion, but it hasn't happened before in any other context, has it?
No, I mean, it's never been the case when one person could type something on a keyboard and shape what 2 billion people are thinking or doing. I mean, that's a type of power that is just completely unprecedented in human history. And we don't think about, I think, that power asymmetry when we go to Facebook or go to Twitter, or when we go to YouTube, and the recommended video algorithm is the back end to it is AlphaGo, which beat the world champion at the game of Go. So you're sitting across the table from AlphaGo when you open up YouTube, so it's trying to get you to spend more time.
So say that again. So AlphaGo is an AI that beat the world champion. Is it Go? Is it a Chinese board game?
It's a Chinese board game, yeah.
Okay.
And it was this long pursued feat of AI prowess, and where the world champion at Go was like, this guy is way beyond my abilities, kind of. But that same algorithm, there were 5 projects. It was after that it was put to work on. Self-driving cars was one of them, but another one was getting people to spend more time and click on more things on YouTube.
So when we log into YouTube to look at one video, it's 2 minutes long, and then we're part of a playlist or there's a suggested video. The entity thinking of that's basically what they did next after defeating the smartest human in the world at a board game. So that's what we're up against.
Yeah, and I think in the conversation around AI broadly, I mean, this isn't acknowledged enough, is that one of the biggest business incentives for the development of the most advanced AIs is advertising, which, that is to say, the shaping of people's thoughts and behaviors. So this is why I think that, I don't think it makes sense to even have conversations about AI right now, broadly speaking, unless we talk about advertising, because the companies that are leading the pack their business incentive is advertising, basically.
And does the advertising work? Online sales are a couple of 100 billion. World GDP is 70 trillion. Is that the space they're expanding into all the time? Is that what the game is?
Yeah, I mean, it works. I mean, in the 50s, there was this department store owner in the US who said, half my ad spend is wasted, I just don't know which half, because they couldn't measure the effectiveness of it. But I think what the internet brought was, on one level, this infrastructure of measurement. So now there's a feedback loop, and they can see what works. And then you have, personalization, hyper-targeting, but then this kind of automation.
What's hyper-targeting?
Well, so if there's information that the system knows about you, that you search for something, that you care about something, that you live in a certain place or of a certain age, it can target you more explicitly, more directly. And these mechanisms are things we could be using for great purposes, right? But it's just that they're in the service of people who want to persuade us toward things that aren't our our goals. Like if there was a version of Facebook I could pay for that knew that I had been trying to finish the PhD, or knew that I was trying to write a book and could design the system toward that, like I would have paid, to use that system. It's just that it's easier and more scalable to do advertising, and so that's why it's the default business model for companies now.
Do you feel like a voice shouting in the wilderness about this, or do you think people are ready to listen to the fears you're expressing and the warnings that you were giving?
I mean, I started my research at Oxford in 2011, and nobody was talking about this stuff. And so the last couple of years have been really heartening to me, in that these conversations are, happening. They're in the foreground. I get invited to great events like this where we can have like conversations about these issues. My hope is that the momentum can continue, and we can, regardless of what happens politically or how the winds change, in terms of the media cycle of things, that we can keep having these conversations about, what kind of lives we want to have, and then how technology can actually be designed and the incentives can be structured to help it be designed that way. I think the saddest thing would be is if these conversations kind of just went away or fell off a cliff, and we went back to just kind of trusting that tech companies were doing things that were in our interests, but still designing in ways that keep us kind of hooked, keep us infantilized. And I think one of the big battlefronts for that right now is the adoption of these voice automated devices like Google Home, Amazon Alexa, because I think the point of adoption is a critical moment to have these conversations. And as far as I can tell, a lot of people are bringing these devices into their homes without any clear sense of what do I want these to do for me.
Just to check, does anybody here have a voice activated home device yourself? Which one is it?
Google Home Mini.
Google, okay, and you just say Google, hey Google, book me a restaurant. Turn on the TV. Okay, very good.
My parents live
That's almost old-fashioned way of using it. Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
But my parents live in Seattle, and they have one, and it's a cool device. It's cool tech, but like I'll ask it for a result, and I'll say, okay, Google, like, why did you give me that result? And it'll say, sorry, I can't help with that. But to me, that's like one of the things we ought to put in there first, right? Is a kind of conversation or kind of accountability.
It's when Google replies, why are you asking so many questions, human? That's when we start to get worried.
Yeah, open the pod bay doors, Google.
The one advantage of being Irish is that all of those voice-activated applications have no idea what we're saying, so we just argue with them, which can be quite cathartic, and it doesn't seem to create any dependency. I just want to actually, do we have any questions from the audience? I have plenty of questions, but I just want to involve, if there's anybody has any questions at this stage. Does anybody, yes, lady here? And good, up and loud so the audience can hear you as well.
You're talking about the trust to the companies like Facebook and their money making in advertising. And I also find that the companies, we feed them with our money every day because we use them. And we do not really know when they have targeted audience. Like to say, well, you targeted and you reached 30,000 people, depending on what criteria you've chosen. You have no possibility to really know if you did target it 30,000. You have to trust them.
This is if you buy advertising from Facebook,
yes.
Yeah.
You do. So we trust them very much, even in putting their money into their system. So that's also a part of this game.
Yeah, and I guess because they're our friends, isn't that right? We think of them as because it's a friendly company because all our friends are on it. What about digital natives? So people who are under the age of 20, are they do they know? Are they better at spotting that they're being manipulated? Are their networks different? Are they on different social networks? Are they more savvy or more vulnerable?
There are variations in usage of different services by age. So like younger people, last I checked, were more likely to use things like Snapchat, Instagram than Facebook as a platform. I think in terms of vulnerability, I think that to me, this is one of the risks of, the societal discourse focusing too much on effects on children, which obviously gets, is politically salient. And I mean, my wife and I just had our first child in January, and so this is something I'm certainly thinking about. But I think the vulnerabilities we're talking about are vulnerabilities we all have, and there's nobody, just by virtue of being born in a certain generation, is immune or, I think to any large degree, less susceptible to all of this. Because part of the challenge is like it's the constant persuasion. I mean, we would have to be superhuman in our attentional and willpower capacities, I think, to really be conscious of it every second of every day, and be able to really resist it in the way we need to. So I think that there are unique developmental issues that arise in the context of children, minors, but I don't think that it means that, I don't think they're necessarily more vulnerable in a general sense than I'm not a developmental psychologist. Yeah. So, yeah.
But looking at this, could you say that perhaps we all here are suffering a bit of generational bias? Because as a child I'm born in 72, so I pretty much is the kind of generation that started television and kind of saw people growing up on television in Norway. Because during my young years, we started getting multiple channels and stuff. And I mean, everybody was talking about, how dangerous it was with television, how it would destroy incentive, and how it would pacify. And I mean, you're an American. Like, I mean, you grew up in an even harder TV reality. And do you think that sort of destroyed your potential, or did it decrease your ability to choose paths later in life? I mean, for us, I think this internet and stuff could be dangerous, as perhaps television also was for perhaps my generation and the generation behind, who's not used to it, and therefore has. But then again, also you were talking about alcohol and gambling. Are not also these also just symptoms on something different? To go back to your analogy with the car and the windshield, is it important to wash the windshield if you have no control over the car anyway? If the traffic is so packed and everybody, all the decision of where you're allowed to go and how fast you're going to drive and everything is already given to you. Is it perhaps that we're making a society that doesn't challenge us, that doesn't give us reason to have we don't have anything to pay for with our attention, so we end up doing nothing instead?
Yeah, I mean, the last part of what you said reminded me of another bit in Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, when he says, he's contrasting George Orwell and Aldous Huxley, and he said what Orwell feared would be those who would ban books, but what Huxley feared would be there would be no reason to ban a book because there would be nobody who wanted to read one. So I think on the broader point of kind of media, so I think any new medium, there's a kind of element of the conversation that is moralizing in one way or another. Socrates about writing, or the zipper, when it was introduced, was called the lure of the devil because it let people take their clothes off more quickly. and it did, but their analysis wasn't wrong, right? But it was the value kind of consideration that was wrong there, I think. But so I think if you think about things like TV, radio, the amount of time we had to understand what they were about, what they were doing, how they were reshaping our lives, reshaping social relations, it was on the order of human generations, like 40, 50 years. I think part of the challenge now is that, like what the phrase, you never step into the same river twice, is like you never use the same product twice. It's changing under our feet every day. The digitization of media it makes it where it can be so rapidly changed that we never have the ability to really kind of become competent in it and really truly understand it. We're sort of competent with it, but not so competent that we can like sort of completely bend it to our will. And then at the same time too, in television, at least in the US, up until the Reagan administration, we had things like the Fairness in Broadcasting Act, where you had to give equal time to different candidates. Whereas now, we don't have anything, there's nothing remotely like that for the internet. It's not even clear what that would look like. So I think I think part of the problem is the pace of change. Part of the problem is the nature, the digital kind of virtualized nature of the medium. I do think we should certainly be wary of not veering into that moralized zone where we are objecting things just because they're new. I mean, I've been having this experience lately where I'll give talks and one day I'll be accused of being too anti-technology and the next day I'm accused of being too pro-technology. And to me, I think that means I'm doing something right. So I certainly think we should avoid the moralistic kind of mode, you know, like are we destroying the next generation, this kind of thing. But I think we should also not let that inhibit our ability to see clearly and draw lines between how technologies are designed and what actual effects they have in the world. So.
Man in blue shirt here.
I really feel that this is a very difficult problem to nobody of us have any solutions. But what follow up on the last question. The problem before, maybe when I was a kid also, we were pacified by television, extremely. And the poor people were even more pacified than the rich and intelligent people because they were just watching. I saw that myself because I was living close to poor people in the US. Now the problem seems to be that we're not pacified, that we are intensifying our attention is occupied by something which the problem before was that nothing occupied us. Now the problem is that we're too occupied maybe on something which has to be about clicking, and that is never going to be important. But what I want to ask you about is that how can we get a step further in this? Try to define how should we then occupy ourselves? So is this something to do with the physical experience of life? Is this something to do with the definition of autonomous life? Where is the seeds for the solution in your view?
I mean, it's a great question. It's kind of the $1 million question in a way. You know, as McLuhan said, you know, we shape our tools and our tools shape us. I mean, one way of looking at it is we could say, what are those values that we all are on board with? Like, what do we care about? What are the kinds of lives we want to live individually and as a society? And then, what are the media systems that will actually help those happen the best? But then, obviously, the flip side is the media that we use shape us, and then they can kind of reshape the values, reshape those skills that are needed in the world. I think it's always going to be an ongoing conversation between these things, but I think there's got to be some kind of ultimate stake in the ground from the point of view of values that we put in place. And I think this is what's so important about these conversations about democracy that are happening at the moment. To me, I think, like, you know, in this political domain, like, the question is kind of, what are those essential, non-negotiable things that democracy requires, the kind of democracy we want? And then what are those specific media dynamics that would either undermine it or that can enhance it? I mean, part of the broad view, I guess, in one sense, of our challenge is that so many of these systems, like politics, you know, news, et cetera, they came to fruition and were invented in an era of where print media was dominant. And so they kind of embody the values and the biases of print media. And now in an electric media world, and especially digital media world, there's just a clash between those things. And so I think the question is kind of what of that print media world is non-negotiable, and what are we willing to adapt for this kind of digital media world? But that's a very kind of abstract, kind of generalized way of answering your question. But I think to me, those are the kind of conversations we need to have. I think where are the media dynamics actually undermining the values we're all on board with, and where are they at? Where could they actually support it? Because I don't see any media dynamics that are really, apart from Hurtigruten, I guess, that are really like promoting truth, promoting deep thinking. I mean, a lot of people are saying these things are important, but that's not the same as having media dynamics that actually embody and promote them. So,
any other questions? What time are we doing? Are we doing on time, Jana? Oh, I can't find them there. Have we a few more minutes? Anyone else?
I think the time is actually out.
Okay, all right. Then just as well we've no more questions. Excellent. Okay, so James, thank you very much. Where can we find this? You can find us on the internet?
You can find it. It's on Amazon, but it's also available open access for free on Cambridge University Press's website. So.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think there's a Norwegian translation in the hopper yet. So if any of you guys are translators or no translators. Yeah, shoot me an email.
But it's the English is pretty okay. I've read it and I can read it, so it should be okay. And what's your next project? What are you working on at the moment?
Some different articles, planning out the next book. Yeah, it's kind of.
Is the next book an evolution of this?
Probably
Is it please stand out of our lives? That's going to be the title. I'm serious. Please do. Okay. So James Williams, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for having me.